Welcome to Spread Love in Organizations, the healthcare leadership podcast where we explore leadership with purpose. I'm Naji, your host, joined today by John Bamforth for the launch of his book, Race to Innovation. John grew up in Wigan, England, and studied at the University of Bath and Aston University, earning a PhD in neuropharmacology. He joined Eli Lilly in 1989, building global brands and leading diverse teams after moving to the US in 2001. Most recently, he completed 6 years with Eshelman Innovation at UNC Chapel Hill, helping turn breakthrough ideas into real-world patient solutions. I had the pleasure to know John for years now, and he was my very first guest on this show 4 years ago. John, it's so great to have you again with me today, 4 years later.
Great to be back, Naji.
Well, I certainly recommend folks to listen to your story on our first episode, John. But why don't you share with us again through the lens of the past 4 years and a little bit of the craziness in the word and how the word changed since the last episode we recorded during the pandemic, actually. Can you tell us a little bit more, like a brief story about who you are and where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Well, Naji, you know me well. I had 30 years, as you say, at Lilly, and then moved back to academia, which was quite a journey in itself. And moved back to early stage science, right? So we were in the institute, and I literally just finished the 6-year stint there. We were developing early stage therapeutics, so very different to my role at Lilly, and also digital health companies. So that was a great experience. A great experience for 6 years working back within. We were embedded in the number one school of pharmacy in the country. It was really so about the time that we last talked. I mean, it was around that point in time that everything happened with George Floyd and his murder, and that caused Roy, who's the co-author of the book, Roy Zwellen, and I to pause a little bit. There was a lot of, as we all remember, there was a lot of back and forth at that time around race and everything associated with race and a lot of reflection. And Roy and my reflection was, here's a community, the African American community that we know to a degree. I mean, I'm, at the end of the day, I'm still a Brit, right, at heart. And so I was still in my learning journey about the African American experience here in the US. But, that we knew enough that, the African American community has a really rich history in innovation, entrepreneurship, that's in some cases not many people know. And so we decided to dig in, to do a little bit more research. And out of that came the book, right? And the book dives deep into the African American community, but we believe this is a story that applies to many underrepresented communities in the US. We always say, including white rural America. This is not about the color of your skin. This is about marginalized communities. And I think, and you and I have this global experience, I think this has application outside the US as well.
Yeah, it certainly does. And, I loved how you frame it between your incredible journey, career that you had, your roots, as you also shared last time, and you said you're Brit by heart, and also what has happened through the last years. It's kind of culminated, it seems, in this book, right? So tell us more about Race to Innovation.
Yeah, so, as I say, we took, the research was really to understand the history of innovation within the African American community, which is a long and storied history, pulling out individual stories. Madam C.J. Walker is a great example because it has a connection for us in Indianapolis as well, because that's where she ended up with her business. The first African American female millionaire in the US. And then we interviewed a whole host of current day innovators and entrepreneurs and told their story in the book. And we came out with 5 domains that we think are important to encouraging communities like the African American community. Because our high level premise, this is not a DE&I book, this is a business book, okay? The premise of the book is if we encourage these types of communities and support these types of communities to innovate and become entrepreneurs, there is a benefit to all of us. This is not a zero-sum game. So the majority doesn't lose if we encourage these communities to innovate. We all win. And I think that's probably the most important message from the book. And there's a lot of debate right now in the US and frankly outside the US as well, is that there's a lot of discussion about immigration, there's a lot of discussion about different communities. And some of the concepts are, these people are coming to take our jobs. Our bias is completely different in the book. Our belief is completely different. We believe both from a community perspective and economically that if we encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in these communities, it benefits all of us.
So, John, let's start, and I want to go there because it's a key output that you have about all thriving together. So I want to go there. But before that, can you define how you're thinking about innovation in the book? Like, it's a word, obviously, that everyone uses, like think of, etc. But how do you define innovation?
Yeah, it's a great question. My frame on innovation is probably a little simple. For me, and it goes probably back to our days at Lilly. Innovation to me are novel solutions to really challenging problems. That's one of the benefits of the joys of diverse thinking, particularly on teams, right? I mean, you and I had the pleasure of working together at Lilly on some very diverse teams, global teams. Our work together on Cialis back in the day, we had people from all over the world on that team, right? We had people from Japan. We had people from Portugal. We had people from, when I say in those countries, you're thinking of the people, I know.
Exactly.
Because you all know who I'm talking about.
It's all about people.
It's all about people. But those teams, we didn't pull those teams together because we wanted, different countries and different, colored skin. We pulled together those teams for the talent, right? We pulled in the most talented people we could find from around the world to enable our success. And when we got that team together, and you and I know, that team still talks today. We're talking about like 2003, 2004. And that team still talks today, like almost daily, right? Almost daily. I'm texting those same people, like usually every week in some way, shape, or form. And the reason that team is so tight is the quality of innovation and business acumen that team brought to the table, because everybody had a different view, right? Everybody had a different lens on the problems we were dealing with. Everybody had different ideas of how we could solve those problems. And that was respected within the team, right? We'd argue sometimes and have fun with those arguments. But nonetheless, and it delivered amazing outcomes, right? And I think that's the richness that we're trying to pull out of the book is, look, we've got to, one of the first principles we talk about in the book is recognize potential. So believe there is potential in every individual that comes in front of you, no matter what their background is. Assume potential is the way we describe it. Assume potential. And there are some great examples in the book of individuals that we've talked about in that frame. But if you go in there with that mentality of no matter what background that person comes from, African American, whatever, Lebanese, assume potential, assume that they're going to bring value to the table. It may represent itself in a bit of a different way, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I can, of course, attest to all those stories with Cialis. But John, like, as you were talking about it, which is very true, and we kept being a tight community, either growing within the company or now like that we're spread. As I joined, it was my first job in the, in corporate. It felt so natural But as I grew in roles and leadership, I realized that it's not actually. You have to be intentional about it and have those core beliefs in humanity, basically. And
Yeah.
so you've done it, like you've done it through a Lilly career. You've done it also through leading innovation in academic ways. Like, is there a formula? Can you get people believe in that and do it? Because we discussed several times the scarcity of this. So I'm sure within your book it's kind of a recipe for those aspiring to do that. But in a world where potentially we're seeing more, like people fearing one another rather than embracing our differences to thrive together, like what is your message of hope and how to do that?
I actually don't think it's very hard to do. I just think it's not done very often. Um, and we've probably talked about it before. We may even talked about it in the last podcast. But I'm a great believer in what Daniel Pink describes in his book Drive, because I think it's the essence of building the sort of culture that we're talking about. He talks really about three things. He talks about humans like to learn. They like to feel like they're growing, right? And so asking people in a team, what is the big audacious goal for themselves as individuals? What are they trying to achieve in life? It's surprising how few times people are asked that question, right? What do you want to do with your life, right? So that knowledge piece is important. The other thing he talks about is autonomy. So the feeling that you're in control of what you're doing within your job and that people trust you to go do the right thing. Again, that's an infrequent thing. Everybody talks about micromanagers and the whole nine yards, right? So many times people don't trust their employees to do the right thing. So autonomy is really important. And then the last piece that Daniel talks about in the book is that purpose piece, right? That vision of something. When we were doing Cialis, we won't go into the details, but we had a audacious goal that we all bought into, and nobody believed outside the team that it could be done, but we did, right? We believed it could be done, and we achieved it, and surprised everybody that knew us but we believed that we could do it as a team. We're like, okay, they don't think we can do it. We do. We're going to go do it, right? And sure enough, we built, the number one brand in the category. That's what we wanted to do. Nobody believed we could do it, but we did. And that purpose piece bonded us together, and we had a ton of fun with it as we were doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and like I obviously we talked about this, and I thought a lot about it. Of course, the purpose is so important, but I would go back also to what you started with. It had like purpose, as I thought about it, and it's basically when we discussed me starting this podcast 4 years ago, and the name of spread love, right, in organizations. You have the purpose, the vision, the values. They need to be here and need to be
Yep.
aligned. And then what you just said about trust, like for me, that was the piece I think that you led, and that a lot of us now leaders aspire to lead teams that way, where you build this genuine care of a
Yep.
community here together to achieve this bigger purpose. And you're mixing it with diversity, obviously, as you said. That was one of your core beliefs since the beginning. That made a difference, right? Like this genuine care for one another. And it's funny, like this is why we stay connected, right? Like we genuinely believe that we can achieve something big, but we genuinely believe that we can do it together. And
Yep.
there's a place for all of us. And like we care for one another. And this is why we keep on calling one another,
Exactly.
actually.
No, it's funny because I've got a copy of the book. So this came out of a dialogue with Roy and I, right? So hey, this is really interesting. We should do some research here. Maybe we should write a book. Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we should write. Have you ever written a book? No, I've never written a book. How do we do that? I have no idea. I have no idea how we write a book. But why don't we go try, right? So again, going back to this vision piece, like how are we going to do it? I don't know, but we'll work it out, right? We'll work it out. And there are three. The reason I hold up the book, there are three contributing authors in here. I don't know if you can see it, but there are three faces in the book here, three contributors. And it was really interesting how those three individuals became part of the project. Maya Fitzgerald is a PharmD student at the school. She connected with me on LinkedIn before she even came to the school. And she said, I've read about the Institute. It seems really cool. I've done some work in biotech already. Are there any roles that I can do within the Institute? And Maya's a bundle of energy. In fact, she's already had 2 internships at a company you and I know quite well, Eli Lilly and Company. But Maya did a lot of the early research, a lot of the kind of bench research on the book as soon as she arrived at the school, and got super excited about the whole thing, dove in, and has been part of the project all the way through. Ashley Thomas, we hired from the School of Medicine. She was an individual that when we first hired her, I think all the jobs she'd had to this point, she'd just been kind of, just do the job. We don't need to know who you are, just do the job. And when she came to the Institute, we slowly but surely pulled out. We asked, in one of the early conversations, I said to her, because she told me a few things about her, but she was still a little reticent to share too much. And Ashley's African-American, her stories in the book as well as being a contributor. But she had an interest in gardening. She had turned around the lives of her grandparents by getting them onto health. They were both dying from chronic illnesses. And she'd given up college to go support them and help. She thought she was going to help them through a passage to a premature death. But when she got there, she realized what was going on. They were eating highly processed food, poor food. They were essentially in a food desert. And she completely changed their diet,
Oh, wow.
And got them onto a healthy path, and then went back to college.
Wow.
And so that drove a real interest in this frame of healthy eating, gardening, etc. Lo and behold, she tells me in one of the first dialogues, well, actually, I have an online presence. I'm the Mocha Gardener, and I'm just about to publish a book on gardening. I'm like, what? What? And so, we tell her story in the book, but we pulled her onto the team, right? She comes from the community. She had a passion for what we were talking about. And so she came onto the team. And then finally, Ruben Blackwell, who's an amazing leader from the African-American community here in North Carolina, runs a whole system in Rocky Mount. Rocky Mount in North Carolina was a tobacco town. And then when the tobacco industry became less profitable, what Ruben always says is all the white folks left and left us all behind, right? And so it's a very black town in North Carolina. Ruben runs a federally qualified health center and some entrepreneurial activities in Rocky Mount. And Ruben has a long history with going all the way back to Martin Luther King. So having somebody like Ruben, who has the history of the struggle of the African-American community, having him advisors on the book has been super valuable. His story's in the book too. So that team, long-winded answer, but that team has came together with this, again, going back to what we talked about, with this vision of what we were trying to do with the book, which has changed the frame of how people think about people with different backgrounds, right?
Yeah, and I want to go back to that because one of, as you said, one of the key takeaways you're really framing in the book is those differences can help us make a difference, not just in how we all live together, but in how we all thrive together. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you view this?
Yeah, again, one is this openness to believing that everybody who walks into the room brings value, right? Brings value to the dialogue. But it's also this frame of, a lot of these communities, we like to talk about rural white America as an unrepresented community because first of all, because it is. We've done a lot of work with the Institute up in Western North Carolina, up in Asheville, because we were doing some innovation work in the opioid space. And the epicenter of the opioid crisis in North Carolina is up in Appalachia, up in Asheville. And they had the best insights into that problem. And we built a very successful digital health company to solve some of the problems associated with opioid overdose that was built from the insights of that community, right? So it's just a great example of saying, look, these communities bring insights to problems that others don't. The majority probably haven't had the experience. Like nobody in Raleigh, less people in Raleigh have experienced the opioid crisis than Western North Carolina. So surprise, surprise, because they're dealing with that problem every day, they have the best insights to solve the problem, right? So all you're doing as you wander in there is you're pulling out those insights, those solutions that they already kind of know, right? And you're helping them bring it forward. So that frame of thriving is, let's listen to people, right? Let's assume good. Let's assume potential, and let's assume that by working together, we can solve some of the most intractable problems that we have in our society. It's just a different frame on how to go about engaging with people.
Yeah, that's a beautiful charge, I think, for all of us to just assume those things, assume good, assume potential, and working together to solve big, complex problems. But I have to ask you, JB, why and how you wrote this book?
The why. First of all, there's certainly an African American lens on this. I've spent 24 years here in the US now, still learning about the African American experience here in the US, which has some interesting history. In fact, we're off to Tulsa next week to Greenwood to launch the book, and to launch it's a privilege to launch the book down there because Greenwood has a rich history, right? It was Black Wall Street. We use that example in the book to say, look at the speed of growth and entrepreneurship that happened in Greenwood as it grew. Unfortunately, to the point where people didn't like the speed of growth, right? That's why it was burnt to the ground, because of the speed and the scale of success that was happening in Greenwood. But highlighting for me the African American experience, just as an example, right? Just an example of what's possible, and tell some of the untold stories around what the contribution that the African American communities make. Because I'm blessed to have a lot of friends in that community, and certainly at this point in time, it's probably easier for me to tell that story than it is for them, because this strange English guy can go talk about these things where sometimes they may not be able to talk about it, right? But then to say, okay, that's just an example, but let's now open the aperture to say, how about if you apply this idea of the potential of these communities to the US as a whole, to all of these communities that we've talked about, and then even the globe, right? There's too much, we're all looking at these conflicts going on around the world, in your home country, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, you name it, right? We've got to find a way of there being a counterbalance to that, right? To say, when you can look at your enemy and assume they are your enemy, or you can look at somebody and say, again, assume potential, assume that you could maybe have a different relationship with that individual, right? And I think we want the book to be a counterbalance to a lot of the negativity that surrounds us right now.
Yeah, and we certainly need that. We certainly need that, and I'm looking forward to reading it, John. It's hard to like segue into this next section, but I'll do it. You know this one where I'll give you a word and you're gonna give me a reaction. Two words are the same, so we will see if it changed within 4 years. The first one is leadership.
Again, the word that springs to mind is opportunity.
What about you talked about innovation? I have to bring this trendy word these days, AI.
Again, it's just scary because the same words come into mind, opportunity. Risk benefit is the other phrase that springs to mind. The upside is almost endless, but you've already seen it be used in less than positive ways. So endless opportunity, but plenty of risk.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how like you're framing it. I've been thinking about this, right? Like as a tool, and unfortunately, like you have so many tools that can be used for good or for bad and destruction. It goes back to people, right, and the culture you build. So, what about humanity?
Good question. I mean, beauty is the word that springs to mind. We see a lot of things in the press these days, but my lived experience of humanity is very different. If I think about this week alone, I came back from the UK after being over there for a month, and I've spent the week meeting people, right, for a variety of different reasons. I think every one of those experiences has been a really positive one. So in my mind, I think there's so much negativity when you pick up these things these days and look at social media and everything else. The reality is different. Humanity is the reality of talking to people every day is a completely different experience to the one you believe to be the truth when you're looking at the phone, right?
Yes. Yeah. The last one, is spread love in organizations.
Yeah, well, you and I know from our shared experience, and we talked about one of our favorite teams earlier. I think about I'm thinking about one particular friend right now, whose stepson in the last 6 weeks had an accident around a lake in Indiana and passed and died way too young. And obviously the family's really struggling with that right now. And I think the only thing you can do in that situation is support. And I think, for me, that's this is somebody who used to work for me, right? Back in the day, back at Lilly. For me, the relationship I have with that individual has always been very deep. And, this is the time where you've got to step up for somebody. Because that's a family that's in real need right now. And I think being there for people in those times is super important, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you've always demonstrated that, and this is part of love and being here for one another when it's needed. And it goes beyond the job. And I can attest to that, John, like how you've been here with me and, I'm here with you. And it's certainly something we all aspire to be as leaders. Any final word of wisdom, John, for leaders around the world?
Yeah, so I'd say, I would hope people get a chance to read the book. And the reason why is I hope people take a moment to think about the world and think about different communities in the world in a bit of a different way. There is way too much tension wrapped up in the US, wrapped up in other parts of the world. There's a lot of real value by being open to people that don't look like you. Working in global organizations, you get that all the time. We were, I think, blessed to have those global experiences, to know somebody from the Lebanon, to know somebody from Italy, to know somebody from Japan, and to come live in the US. You and I are both immigrants. To live in the US for a period of time and come to know the United States as the beauty of the United States, which we see a lot of negativity around that going on right now. That the United States, the US experience has been a great one for me, and I'm blessed to have had that. But we've got to be open to every community and not just leap to negativity.
Well, thank you so much, John, for being again with me on this show and being with me today. We'll certainly have your book on this podcast, on the website, for many listeners to read it. It's been great to reconnect here on the show, and thanks again.
Pleasure. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more episodes, make sure to subscribe on spreadloveio.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Let's inspire change together and make a positive impact in healthcare, one story at a time.